put it there.
Welcome to COVID Calls. This is an ongoing discussion of the COVID pandemic with a wide variety of disaster experts. My name is Scott Gabriel Knowles. I'm a professor in the Graduate School of Science and Technology Policy at the Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology, and I'm coming to you live today from Daejeon, South Korea. Today is April 5th, 2022, where I am in South Korea, and it's still April 4th, 2022, where my guest, Gonzalo Bacigalupe, is located. And let me just introduce him. He is no stranger to COVID calls, and we're entering a new phase of COVID calls with this episode as we go into the 501st episode, and I'm really thrilled that he's the first guest in this new chapter of this project. Gonzalo is a professor of counseling psychology in the School of Education and Human Development at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, and a research associate of Criasur Universidad de Concepcion. He's also a board director of Family Process Institute and was president-elect of the Society for Couple and Family Psychology. As a researcher and disaster resilience activist, he's been actively engaged in the COVID-19 pandemic as part of an emerging grassroots network of public health professionals, social scientists, and experts mobilizing to change the COVID-19 strategy to prevent contagion in Chile. And let me bring him into the conversation. Gonzalo, it's so good to see you. How are you doing?
How are you doing? I was going to ask you, how are you doing? How am I? How am I doing? We're going to spend the whole hours talking about how we are doing. It's strange because everybody's speaking about post-pandemic here. That's the language, even though, we still having, a quite high amount of death every day. And that's sort of like a somber piece, but actually, I would say everybody around, it's sort of like going normal, even though we go into scares of having to do antigens and test ourselves. I think I got influenza a few weeks ago. The whole family here got it. So it's been what the pandemic's been about. It's sort of like you think things go in a certain direction. My last column 2 weeks ago, or maybe less than 2 weeks ago, that was published here, it talks about the virus has not received the memorandum that the pandemic has ended. That's the title of the column. And it's just, but we insist that things that we know what's happening. And as a colleague of mine, an immunologist, is we don't know what's going to happen. We really, it's very hard to predict. And what things that happened this. A little bit over 3 weeks ago was we had a change of government from a sort of like neoliberal right wing.
Are you in Santiago right now?
I'm in Santiago right now, right? Yeah. And we have this new government, which is very young, the youngest president we ever had.
Yeah.
He's just 36 years old.
Boric?
Yeah, and he's now visiting Argentina, and the VP is 35 years old. So she was the president of the medical association that was pretty much involved in during the pandemic. So it's very interesting, but at the same time, nothing has changed. They say that there are going to be announcements, but really not much has changed. It's this continuity of the program. And the program is to vaccinate. We are as you know, together with Cuba, we are the country with the highest vaccination. Well, in Latin America and in the world, basically, we've been vaccinating a lot, but we vaccinated at the beginning with Sinovac, CoronaVac, with the activated virus, and now, but really realized that it wasn't very helpful with Omicron and before, and so we are now people vaccinating with the Pfizer and Moderna and all those other vaccines.
People are doing a whole second course of vaccination at this point.
Well, at this point, everybody's that's the thing. I mean, there's a lot of people who have not vaccinated, close to 1 million, who are not vaccinated with a an ARNM, messenger vaccine, like Pfizer. And so they're basically, they more than 6 months since they vaccinated with Sinovac, they're not really protected with Omicron.
Mm.
But there's a lot of other people like myself who we already have the fourth vaccine plus influenza shots plus, so, but there's high levels of vaccination, but also there's this still the lack of understanding that it does not prevent contagion. So
Yeah, I think I'm in South Korea, and we're coming through the period of time here that would have been, I think, unimaginable to lots of people, even 6 months ago, because things were so managed so well here from the beginning,
right.
and they turned track and trace into a sort of
An
art form.
Yeah.
I mean, and
yeah, there's none of that. There's no truck and nothing. There's none.
And, well, it's easy to get used to. I mean, unless you're a person who's temperamentally thinks the government is trying to put a microchip in your head. Otherwise, I think you would see almost immediately the impact of it with the data flow that gives you useful daily information.
Yeah.
And that's all fine and good. And Korea was slow to vaccinate for complicated reasons, but they couldn't get supply. But they did, and they got up to 86-87% by the fall, and then Omicron came. And as you said, I mean, you can be vaccinated, but it's not going to stop the transmission. And at just the moment when Omicron was breaking, the government made the decision that it was time to live with Corona. And so they started relaxing gatherings. They started allowing, socializing. And here people follow. I mean, this doesn't make sense to listeners in the United States. But if the government here says, don't gather in a group more than 8, people don't do it.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you go from a gathering of 0 to a gathering of 4 and 8, it makes a difference. You see the curve. And then January came and the cases just went up and up and up. And it was that curve started to get very steep. And the death rate, they surpassed their death rate for the entire pandemic within, I don't want to speak out of turn here, but within a short period of time, like 30 to 45 days. But it never overwhelmed the hospital system. And we're coming down the other side of Omicron now with that 87% vaccination rate. That's the nature of things here. So it's probably going to be, a situation where if they need, people still mask indoors and outdoors. So it's going to be a slow transmission rate once we're out of Omicron, as slow as anywhere in the world. One thing I wanted to ask you about, something you were mentioning a moment ago about vaccination. I haven't seen them budge that number. Once they've gotten up to around 87%, they have not, gone further than that. And it would be hard to go further than that, but still you want to. I mean, you want to get into the 90-95% range.
Right. It depends. The problem is, what is it that you define as that? Because right now they talk about 91%. But what is it that you're saying that 91% is? Because it might be that 91% includes people who had 2 vaccines, and they've been more. And because we started vaccinating very early on, I mean, we started vaccinating, a month after these rallies. I mean, in February of last year. So we've been vaccinated for more than a year. We began massive, so to speak. I mean, most of all people vaccinated February, March of 2021, a year ago. So those folks have had to be right now safe. They need 4 shots. Otherwise, they're not protected. And so the problem is that when you count that you've got 2 shots, you got to 2 shots of Sinovac, because was mostly what it was used. Different decision that Uruguay had, which they decided to go with the Pfizer and others, the active, the piece of AD, the messenger vaccine, with the older people. Here we did it. So in a way, this is the strategy. We are a country that when the government says vaccinate, people vaccinate. Now the thing is, some of the decisions were too rushed, and I think that that created a whole set of anti-vaccine sentiment. So you find, and I think social media is not necessarily represented where the people are, but there's a lot of anti-vaccine sentiment that was not present in Chile before the pandemic. This is going to have consequences for the long term, because I think that we didn't have that. We were really a public health example in Chile around vaccines.
Mm.
And on the other hand, I think that we are not necessarily reaching the typical thing. We're not reaching those who maybe are in rural areas, people who don't have the time, whatever. So there is, like you said, I mean, a huge amount of people that are not protected, really, with the newer vaccines on the one hand, and then on the other one is, I think that there's a lot of people who basically take too many risks because they think that they're vaccinated and they're ready. A little bit of what happens in the United States. In some ways, interesting. We have similar numbers to the United States. I mean, numbers in the US are actually worst as an average. But we, somehow we should not have been in that close to the US. We should have been able to do it differently. So, for me, the big problem is that everything is here was on the vaccine. And then what happens is that then you got, not exactly the numbers right now, but around 50%, close to 50% of the death of the pandemic happened in the last 3 months, between January and March. And so then people who are anti-vaccine say, well, you see, you vaccinated and still people are dying. So you get this sentiment that logic that is, it's the usual logic that is so hard to fight with. So and now there's the other thing is here still this masking outside, and I take the mask outside when there's no people around, and because I was in Boston and that was the way it was, and so there's the whole now thing is how you're gonna people have masks inside, and the thing is this Chile is a very neoliberal sentiment in some way, and people think, well, you have to be in charge of your mask rather than making it into a public decision, making masks available everywhere, like in the US, where basically masks are available everywhere, and also making certified, good masks, available for people, and also we went back to schools. Kids went back to school with no transition nationally. So there's been a lot of outbreaks in schools and confusion because there's no tracking. So I think, yes, we did very well with vaccination. I think even if we don't, as you know, you cannot vaccinate everybody anyway. But I think that if we have done a little bit more around prevention, we would have been in such a much better place right now.
I think that will be, as we do the sort of comparative studies over time, as you know, I mean, this is a very strange disaster in so many ways, but the fact that it has been truly synchronous globally means we're going to have the rest of our careers to try to figure out what's going on. But as you said, I mean, we have a lot of countries. I think Chile and the United States very much in the same boat. The rush was to the techno fix.
Yeah, the technocratic.
So let's get to the vaccine. The vaccine will be the Deus ex machina, and everything will be fine once we get to that. In Korea, it was they would have liked to rush to the vaccine, but they bet early on
supply.
On supply, and it didn't materialize, and so but they used the non-pharmaceutical interventions, and I suppose that we would be looking for countries that did both simultaneously and effectively. And that's going to be, or places that just shut down entirely. I mean, close their borders entirely. The Australian or New Zealand approach.
Yeah.
I mean, it still boggles my mind how many different approaches, and how complicated and how noisy the data still is to be able to work upward from those approaches and actually look at a population level what happened. And even within the U.S., and I don't know if this breaks down like this within Chile. I mean, you were talking about the urban-rural divide, but the experience of the pandemic in Massachusetts or Vermont
is different from, yeah.
And I mean, people were still talking, recently. I know you keep up with American politics very closely, North American politics very closely, that, Ron DeSantis wants to run for president, and he's governor of Florida. And there's
Yeah,
he's
yeah,
been pushing this idea that Florida was open and Florida's numbers are as good as California. It's like, you know what? If I know Americans are like a little bit illiterate, they're a little bit innumerate,
right.
but if you just dive into the data one layer,
You're right.
the experience of the pandemic in Texas and Florida is quite different than the
Yeah,
experience of the pandemic in
right,
California.
right. I mean, Florida did worse. I mean, it's
Terrible,
awful. I mean, and
terrible.
one of the things that what it's interesting, because there's this whole thing. I mean, you were saying that we had a whole career studying this, but beyond the epi of the pandemic, I think that where we are in terms of a post-pandemic is some of the social mores. I mean, the violence that has emerged here and elsewhere. In the U.S., there's a lot of, I mean, the violence in schools, the general sense of obnoxiousness, the discourse. So like everybody's on, doing higher revolution in their minds. It's like people driving their cars sort of like in 3,000 rather than the usual 1,000, 1,500 kind of thing. So that in a way, I think that we are in that sense living a very treacherous moment in which people are very anxious, and in terms of post-pandemic, there's a lot of trauma around. I think that our world, in different ways, of course, obviously the most vulnerable have the world upside down too. But I think that for those, and I would qualify both of us as more privileged, even the more privileged, and some folks who might have had a regularity to their lives, the whole thing went upside down, because of the virus itself, because they got sick, because some people died, but also because of the economics. And when I'm thinking, what this is going to do to families in terms of thinking about what it was to live through this period, what it was to bury people, what it was to lose jobs, to lose projects, and also, and this is what I see among my colleagues, and again, I think the more privileged, is this existential angst.
Yeah.
Am I doing the right thing? Am I contributing? Is this the kind of life I want to live? Is this, and I think that has become much more prevalent than it might have been maybe a year and a half ago, where we were thinking maybe, and I was one of those that I always saw the glass half full rather than half very much empty. It was that we had this conversation, one of our first COVID calls, when people ask, well, do you think that people are going to get better? The world is going to be better? And I said, probably not. Probably it's going to be worse, and people are going to go back to more. And I'm thinking, for instance, in terms of car consumption, people buying new cars and people driving everywhere, and even individualizing more and more. I don't know if that's what you're experiencing there, but the sense of we were not protected by our common ground. We're not protected by our governments. We're not taken care of. So now, I have to take care of myself and my family, period. And every time I enter a conversation and I say, well, for instance, when I say health should not be for profit, people kind of like go bizarre. I mean, it's like, well, if I have more money, I can pay more for a hospital or whatever. Let me be sort of like, there's this sense of lack of, a lot, sort of like the pandemic. Even though I think that some of the solutions came from coming together, I think it intensified at the same time the sense of the neoliberal kind of mind. And that's very worrisome.
Let me just remind folks real quickly, you're listening to COVID Calls, and I'm talking to Gonzalo Bacigalupe today, and this is the 501st episode, and we're going to talk about the launching of the COVID Calls digital archive and your artwork here in just a second.
Let's talk about the art.
Yeah, let's talk about the art, because I think it's a good transition moment, because that problem you just pointed to me is the central. I mean, grief, I think, ultimately will be the central problem of this pandemic.
Right.
But closely associated with that, as you called it, an existential angst of people trying to decide how best to cope and keep community together. And I think because early on in the pandemic there was that isolation for those who could do it,
Right.
that we connected this way. We made communities online. We did all million creative things to try to
Yeah.
keep together and keep solidarity. But the nature of this disease and this virus, this disaster, is that we could not physically be with people, and we have still not been able to be. Most people have not. And I think it matters. I really do.
Yeah.
I think that it has, and it is even people like myself who's will be looking towards community and kin to try to solve problems. I've become more isolated,
Yeah.
and I don't want to be.
Right.
But as you said, it's like, well, I can take care of my family and take care of my, close community.
Right.
I'll try to move my work into a venue. I can still do my work, even though it's me alone most of the time. In the end, even I have been forced into more individualistic modes, and I don't think that is not the way out of this.
Right.
That's not the way we're going to prepare for the next one.
Right. 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 It's interesting. I was, as we were going to be talking about the art that you're going to be displaying in the website, um, I was thinking, okay, so how do I see the progression of this art and what has been happening? And I surround here myself with a couple of pieces that are in those photos, but these are the large pieces in the back. And I thought, okay, so there's three stages to this. Before the pandemic, and it's still at the beginning of it, when even though we knew that this was going to be long, but we have the fantasy that somehow we'll get back to quote some normal 6 months or a year after. I was embarked in this project, these paintings that I call uncertain cartographies. And uncertain cartography was basically like a dozen large, very large. I mean, this size. You have them here in the back. Details of those are in the website, and these were, these paintings intended to, and I call them uncertain geographies, intend to reflect sort of like the world from the air, very distant. It's sort of like it's an abstract paint. In this case, it's an abstract painting that reflects the connection between water and the earth and the ocean, and the impact that natural threats might have, and the importance of the interaction, for instance, between a meadow and a beach for the healthiness of that environment, and how that is invaded by human by buildings and stuff. So this one is really a piece that also its materiality reflects that, because it has that scratchy kind of feeling. It has also some texture to it, and it intends to reflect that. So, and one of the things I did before the pandemic was a lot of work using drones to create cartographies with communities. And so this painting reflects all those influences, and that's what I was working on. And the one here also, that one, so this one here, I finished it probably before the pandemic. I was, and it's kind of clean if you see it. And then the next one, which has similar colors, similar materiality, but it also has, and it's also in the photos, has breakages. It's a technique where you break the painting after it has been painted, and then you paint it again, and it has that sense of that when there's droughts and the thing in materiality breaks, and it reflects that kind of thing. It also reflects the natural back and forth of waves, that kind of feeling. So I was working on this and they intend to represent these things and how the climate crisis involves and all that stuff. And then you know, the second stage was when we went into what you were referring before, this the quarantines and the quarantine zone. That's what I call the quarantine series, and I painted a lot during that period. I think when finally, we were at home and things sort of like slowed down, even though I was working really hard. But I in some way, that those paintings, which are in a lot in that in the in the site. I mean, all of these, there are like 100 of them.
Yeah.
They are small and reflect that I was lacking. I didn't have enough materials, but I have kept some postcards that I had bought in Japan a couple of years before, during a and, these are cards that are used for calligraphy, but they're very nice. They're very thick. They're great for experimenting with different kinds of wetty materials. And so I had kept them for a special occasion. It's one of those things. And then so they, and in some way they intend to represent, I guess, the virus in some way, the body again. I paint, besides painting abstract notions of our territories, I also paint. This is how I started painting several years ago. I intend to represent the body. And so remember at the beginning, there was this whole idea of what's the body. I mean, we didn't even have that. Now we associate with that circle, with these things, the spikes, as the virus. But I was trying to represent it. In fact, one of those paintings was used for a report on, I have it somewhere here, for a report on Latino health and COVID in Massachusetts. And I think that these were some of the paintings that were used for that book. And in a way, they're sort of like, again, they're in the photos there. They intend to capture that, what is the virus about? And I had a lot of fun with these paintings, and they were first in a box. Now I put them in little albums and stuff.
Well, let me just quickly show people how to find this. And the digital archive is launched, so you can go to COVIDCalls.net, or you can go to COVIDCalls.com, either one, and you'll find it. And people might not know, but the whole look of COVID Calls, the logo that we adopted in 2020 was one of these paintings. So when you go to the site and you go into this section of works, and so here you find what you're talking about, Gonzalo.
So that one is the one that's one of those, that's details. So that one here, and the other one in the photos is that one there. So the one at the top is the one that you're talking about. That we used for the COVID.
And I don't know if you remember this, but the first time we met actually was in the faculty dining. I don't even know what the name of it is, but it's in one of the most extraordinary buildings. This like copper building
at the Innovation Center
campus there. It's like it's a shrine to copper, and it has this beautiful restaurant inside. And I walked through the restaurant, and as on the way in, there's these remarkable paintings full of color and dynamism, and some. I mean, they were really evocative of disaster. But of course, I start to feel, as a disaster researcher, I'm like, oh, I see disaster everywhere. Like, I should stop that. And then I met you, and so you're a disaster researcher. You're like, yeah, I did these paintings, and these are, these are volcanic, these are seismic. These are you working through just as you were describing as you were earlier talking about climate change and the way you were rendering climate change on the canvas, with the way that you bring the paint forward and then crack it and then move over it. And so I was right that you were
you were right. Yes, of course.
and of course, ever since then, I just have been lucky to continue to know you. But as the pandemic started, I immediately thought, even before I knew you were making these, I was like, I know Gonzalo's up to something. And I'm
Yeah, so this
yeah.
one I call it the quarantine series, and I did a lot of them, and I put them in Instagram, and people reacted to them, and it's interesting because, for instance, that one, the one that you're showing,
What,
that
how
one is,
would you
yeah,
like me to start at the beginning of the series and work
sure,
through, or how
yeah,
would you
go
like?
ahead.
We don't have to
Just I
talk
was
about it.
giving you the, and then the last one, so that's the quarantine series, and then the last one, which I finished painting in 2021. We can talk that at the end, and it's the one the one that you have a lot of details at different moments of the painting that I had an installation in Boston last fall, and it's called The Ocean of Data, which it gets back to the epi, but it gets back to the story. So yeah, let's start from the beginning.
Okay, let's start here. And if you're, for those who are listening, instead of viewing this live, you can just go to covid-calls.com or covidcalls.net, click on works, and you will find this entire series, this
Yeah,
quarantine
so that's that
series, which
painting.
so this is the opening of this series. I mean,
Yeah,
I've never hosted an art opening before, but here we are, and I'm
right.
just
Yeah,
delighted.
yeah.
So talk to us about this one.
Yeah. So this one is the one that I was actually showing you
Right.
earlier, and it's really a territory. So if you were to think of this in the coast of Chile, the Pacific, what you see at the top there is the ocean. So you think it if you think it from the top as if you were looking at a map. So this is a map. It's a form of cartography. I'm Batesonian fan. I learned about systemic thinking through Bateson early on when I was a psychology student, and then I studied with Umberto Maturana, who follow his tradition. And so I'm very influenced by this notion that the map is another territory, and and this is it. This is my map of that territory in an abstract way. And so then at sort of like the green space on the left is really a meadow. It's a where there's a lot, it's where the water, the salty water intersects with the fresh water that comes from where there's a lot of life and there is a lot of danger. But it's also one of those that for my colleagues who are, it's something I learned working with them. It's a very, besides being a rich natural environment and ecology, it's one of the best ways to actually mitigate the force of a tsunami,
Hmm.
because these meadows, these things, um, um, humedales, as they're called in Spanish, they really help mitigate the force, and they space for the water that comes from the ocean to absorb the force so that it doesn't impact the rest of the coast, and they're in danger. So it intends to represent that. And then that I love blue, and that blue at the center is sort of like a volcanic influence, I guess, because it it could be a volcano also from the top. As you see, there's a form that creates. So it's abstract. So in some way, it intends to reflect the force of nature. The black, the sort of like, um, yeah, it's not black. It's gray and gold. It's I would say that that's where humans influence is. I mean, it's sort of like the devastation. It intends to reflect that. Of course, human activity can be positive. It's not, it doesn't necessarily have to be always negative. But in the context of this kind of environment, the fact is, I wish we could just let it be alone. I wish we didn't build next to these areas. I wish people didn't build next to the ocean or large bodies of water, because it's probably one of the all it ensures is disaster, and droughts and stuff like that. So that's what that painting is about. And yeah, And there, all those, that one too, is another painting, and it's similar. I usually paint, sometimes have 2 or 3 paintings that I'm doing at the same time. Painting for me is like writing, although
Mhm.
to say it's in the sense that you edit a lot, that the editing, it's, you do a lot of editing, and that's central. And in that sense, it's very similar. It's, for me, it's easier to start a painting. I feel more free to start. With writing, it's harder for me to start. Not so difficult to edit, but now what, again, as you can see also in this painting and in several of the others, there is a flow. There is a flow.
Mhm.
There is a sort of like a sense of circularity to these paintings. As if you it's hard to do in the computer, but if you see the painting for a while, you see that they're not horizontal lines or vertical lines or horizontal lines that define the painting, but they're more circular. And nature is more circular than straight. So that's what is there. Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna just keep going, and
Yeah,
if you
same
any
thing from
points you
there.
want me
Yeah, that's another detail. That's a detail from the one that I was seeing.
to.
It's
Mhm.
interesting here. You see that you see that line there. It that line at the bottom. You see these
Yeah.
things. Now that I see it here, it's easier to see in the photo than it is to see it in the painting. Actually, you have to concentrate to see it. That's interesting. It's the only place where there's a straight line, and it's graphite, and it's there, and it's not there, and I see that as human activity. It was I was
Mm.
referring to earlier. Yeah,
So yeah, it brings this Cartesian element
yeah,
into it that's not
yeah, yeah, yeah,
in the other ones. I just want to put a pin in this because we're going to come as we go through other ones. When I
yeah,
look at, I wish I had done better over time taking notes of how I feel when I interact with artwork before the pandemic. You know, lots of things I feel like I've lost elements of my memory almost before the pandemic, but I
that's trauma,
see
man.
I see things, and the first time I saw some of these paintings when you shared them with me as the cards, I saw lungs, I saw alveoli, I saw breathing,
Yeah,
and and
absolutely.
and leaf work. I mean, I
Yeah,
basically I saw very organic,
right,
sort of branching, circulatory
right.
looking things, but I immediately thought of lungs. And when I look at this again, I haven't seen that in this one before, but I know that's you're describing a beach from and you're
Yeah.
describing an interplay between human and natural as seen from above, but I still see lungs.
Yeah. Well, it again. I advance you this idea that I start painting, and I have a painting of a lung, and it's similar. And in that one there is the straight line too, because it reflects the way we tend to represent lungs. But you're right about this. There's this thing about the breathing. Yeah, this one was interesting. But is I'm going to go back to Bateson systems. The nice thing about general system theory and systemic thinking and ecosystemic thinking is that where there's life, that's you can understand the interconnectedness. And so you see a lung, the ocean is sort of like a lung in some ways.
Mhm.
It's a breathing system. I hope it's clearer now as we think about the climate crisis. So this one is the one I was earlier showing you here.
Right.
And this one, if you see at the top of, so this one is much more, it reflects much more turmoil. It's much more, it's stormy, I guess, if you want to put it that way. But it also, it it intervenes the the painting with this breakage, there at the top right there. And it is actual. painting that is breaking. Well, it's not falling apart, but it's really is breaking. Is a technique where you break it, and there are different places where that is happening, and in some places, it cannot be seen in the photo. Um, it is quite beautiful because it almost looks like the skin of an amphibious animal,
Hmm.
that has that sort of like thing that shows um, this venous piece is sort of like a like leather when it breaks. So I think that this one, it's it's I would say, um, a stormy one, a more destructive one. It reflects more the uncertainty too.
Hmm.
I was earlier telling you about this editing, and that I forgot to finish the idea with that. Is that when we write, at some point we have to finish it, and so in the same way that for me, because it doesn't, I talk to other artists and they have different ideas about it, but they all artists talks about this. It's easy for me to start. It's easy for me to edit when I paint, but it's the most anxious part is to know that is it done, because if you overdo it, you destroy it basically, and it's gone. With writing, it's easier to finish it, and you can go back. It's much difficult with painting to do that, but with writing, of course, for me again, it's hard to start, and that makes it
Hmm.
um, so this one, in a way, I it took oh, here it is.
Here's
The
the
pieces
detail.
here, it shows that breakage that I was talking about.
Right.
I could have continued painting, and I'm glad I did not. And that's why sometimes when people say to me, how long does painting takes, and the question makes the assumption that it's about the amount of time you paint, that you
Hmm.
dedicate to the painting. But the fact is, like in writing, and you write a lot, you're always thinking about the writing. You see something, you read something, say, oh, this stuff, makes it. So painting will take months, even though maybe the act of painting it takes maybe sometimes half an hour or 20 minutes or an hour or whatever, but you go back and paint again. And this one I had to some point stop, because what I like about this painting is that it feels that it's like layers. It's like when you fly on a plane.
Right.
I love to look outside and you see this, the clouds, and you see then other clouds more at the bottom, and there is this sense that you're flying. And this one, in some way, you see that white gray kind of thing. It looks like clouds. I mean,
Hmm.
and then there's a breakage at the bottom. You see the ocean it's like when you're flying on the ocean, and then there's this these breaking things that are seen at the top, which is kind of weird. But again, it abstract painting allows you for that play with the different dimensions. And if I had continued painting, I would have lost that. So yeah, this is a detail. What I would say is my last painting related to the pandemic, and I have other things, but this one was really hard to do, uh, because I wrote numbers. I started with number one, and then went on and on and on with different kinds of pencils, graphites, different dimensions and stuff. And what I first did was to paint what it would represent the Chilean territory. Again, same thing as this. And it was basically looking at the north, more than the south, with the desert, which for me is one of the most amazing places in the world, the Atacama Desert. And so let me show you, because this one is when I was painting it, so it has faces. But if you let me share my screen, I can show you this painting in two ways. Let me see where it is. But before yeah, I have it here in front of me. So I'll show you the full painting first. And then I'm going to show you the painting in an installation so you can see, because it allows you to, let me see, share screen. Okay, let me go. Oh, it says that. Okay. Window. Wait. There's something weird. Okay, there we go. Here it goes. Preview. I don't know if you were going to be able to see it. Oh, it's just something with the system preferences. Let me see.
Well, while you're, takes a second if you can figure out how to do it. Just go into that share screen, and then it'll give you an option to either share from your desktop or from a tab, or from a file.
Yeah.
Let me remind everyone that you're listening to COVID Calls, and I'm talking today with Gonzalo Bacigalupe about the quarantine series, which is artwork which is now featured on the COVID Calls website, covidcalls.com, covid-calls.com, or at covidcalls.net. And if you go into the site, and you can see lots of things on the site, including COVID Calls episodes going all the way back to COVID Calls #1 in audio, video, and in transcript. And also we are hosting artwork. And so you can go into Works and you will find this remarkable grouping of paintings that Gonzalo has been talking about and sharing. Any success with the screen share there?
No, what I'm gonna just do, Scott, is I'm gonna just send it to you, and then if you want to share, that's fine. Send it to you via email right now. As we speak, it's much easier for me to do so right now. So there's one here. I already sent it to you right now. I'll send you one if you can share this. So this painting that you were seeing a piece. It's larger than the ones that I just shown. It's on paper, and it uses mixed media. So in the first part, I did use watercolors and acrylic, and I used some of the postcards to actually stamp elements in this big piece to create this map of the Chilean territory. And then I had this idea in my mind about how I was going to do it. I mean, sometimes with abstract painting, you start and then you know, this one I had a sort of like a very good sense of what I wanted to do, and it was basically I wanted to show to be able to move us beyond the quantities, the epidata, you know, and to think of each individual in those thousands that would die as individuals, as folks who have a story. So I started to draw the numbers from 1, and I wanted to get, at that point there were like 11,000 people have died in Chile or something like that. But when I got to the number, I don't know, close to 5,000 or somewhere there, I couldn't continue. It was just too painful. So I stopped writing the numbers and I finished the painting. I then added some layers of paint and, you know, some things that I wanted to do. But so you see, the bottom will be basically closer to the ocean, and then at the top it will be closer to the Andes Mountains. The Chile is very long, but in the north part is where the wider part, and so it intends to reflect the colors of the desert, and it intends to see the enormity of the tragedy that we have just lived, and to honor those who have died, because in some way, at least in Chile, in many countries, the numbers were, you know, distorted. We never recognized the enormity of the death. So I sent this. I participated in a call for an exhibition at the Boston Convention Center. There was going to be a health conference, and they were going to have 6 paintings reproduce and put in these large frames inside the convention center during this health conference, this large health conference, and also to reproduce even larger pieces in like big pieces of canvas outside hanging in the convention center. So for a week, less than a week, there was this exhibit, and it was really so people would walk by and talk, and mine was at the entrance, so you couldn't miss it. And I think I was able to capture the what I was able to transmit something that it was in my mind, and people kind of like approach it. And then first it was like, oh, interesting painting. And then when they realized what it was, they had to take the time to reflect and think about it. And this was a typical health collaborative kind of conference where there's a lot of technological stuff, e-health stuff. And so these are details. And when I was doing this, one of the things that I did was also, you see some numbers start to get dissolved into and it's part of that thing about how people die, they go, some stay in our mind, some go, you lose memory. I mean, it intends to numbers are not have different meanings, and that's what I wanted to have in that thing. And it was hard. This was a really, really, really difficult painting, and I have not been able to let it go, because sometimes people want to buy stuff, and this one is still cold enough to take time to let it go, actually. But yeah,
I appreciate you sharing that. And I want to ask you, I mean, because I worked pretty closely over the last couple of years with STS scholar Jackie Vernemont, who's also an artist. And someday I dream to get you both together to talk about your artwork. She works with textiles a lot. And but the way you're describing the inscription is really important. And we are awash in numbers. And,
right.
and I think, as I always prepare COVID call scripts, of typing the numbers in for different countries, and sometimes felt like, and it's going to sound strange, I think, to some listeners, but just the typing of the number was I just didn't like doing it. I mean, it's just like just it's just a keystroke. But that sort of going from day to day as those numbers grew, but I never wrote them out longhand, and I certainly never tried to write them on a canvas or paint them. And I wonder about that for you. You said that work has been too hard to get rid of, but I wonder also, was there some catharsis, or is there some catharsis in the inscription of the number? These are not names, these are numbers, but you're still writing them with the hand.
Right. It's interesting because when the pandemic started, and when in Chile we had, I began writing them, the reports of the number of people who have been with the contagion. So there were 3, and then the next day 12, and I wrote them. I still have those pieces of paper where I wrote it down, numbers. This was when we were counting the pandemic. This is March of 2020. So I have it. At some point you stop, because they're just the numbers were. So I started using. I started to analyze them, and I was not one of those who did. Other colleagues of mine were doing all using the Excel and Stata and all the analysis, and using EPI and biostats, stuff like that. And I wasn't. But at some point, so I thought, but this one was, for me, was more of an exercise of honoring that that I did it. It's there. I documented this, and I've been one of those who, from the day one, I've been advocating. It's been one of my struggles and fights until today, still, to really tell the truth. How many people have really died? In fact, 2.5 weeks ago, the new government here finally gave the real number. It was, a closer number to what it is, because the previous government always reduced it around 20%, because they didn't consider the ones with the exam, the ones that they called them suspected.
Yeah.
And so you know um, I have realized I'm one of those who really think that the truth, even though it's painful, it helps us to deal with trauma, and it just will not allow us to just dissociate, and that is important to grieve and to acknowledge it.
I
Yeah, and
let me
and,
ask
and,
you.
and yeah,
Let me ask you though, because and you and I have talked about this before, so I think it's okay to ask you
yeah,
about Chile's history. I mean,
right,
the struggle over names and numbers coming out of the crimes
right,
of the Pinochet era
right,
is this is not a discussion that is past.
right.
And so I wonder for you, this act. I mean, on the first level, are you still grappling with that? I mean, as you find yourself writing the numbers and
Right.
trying to bring them to life
Yeah.
in ways that, I mean, you're
Yeah.
bringing in this important ways, you're bringing these deaths into a sort of broader conversation about life and change, and mutation through the work. But I mean, are these also the crimes? I mean, is this also in conversation with Pinochet, or no? These are separate events in your
For
mind.
me, they are. I mean, two things. I do think that it's a crime that we let so many people die. I mean, some people tell me no. I do think that it's a violation of the human rights, that that having so many
Yeah,
people dying
I agree.
is a violation of people's rights.
Yeah,
I mean, yes, we could have, which we were going to have people dying, but I think that the enormity could have been prevented if those were by choice. And then in that sense, I think it's a violation of the human rights of people. And we will see that later on and be recognized. But I think that, when I mentioned this painting, I, I was drawn to paint the desert and not the rest of the country. And because there's particular meaning to the disappearance of people in the desert, buried, decapitated, burned, and finally disappear. And and there's still relatives, women in particular, daughters, mothers, and organizations who still look for
yeah,
bones.
yeah,
So in the desert. And so yes, of course. And I, there's this very good movie, the documentary about this name flies now, but director that done a lot of documentaries about Chile in the last 50 years. And there's one in which he connects the search for these bones by these women with the search by the astronomers of these distant stars, which, as you know, the largest telescopes are in the Chilean desert, and in the ALMA project. It's famous, where all these astronomers are, looking for the stars. So yes, of course, and I cannot not think about that. That, as we spoke about probably this in the program, but my mother died a year and a half ago. That she died in September 2020, at a time when there's a lot of quarantine. It was very hard, for months. You couldn't visit her or touch her or be close, because you were afraid of that you could bring COVID to her. And she was in a very fragile state. She died, and she was ill. It was not COVID, but I think that the isolation did not help, and then not being able to bury her appropriately. And because there were limitations about how many people could attend, and all that whole thing. It there's a way in which I think that death is the only certainty we have. We're gonna die. But the denial of death is an operation of power. Um, it's an operation of our whatever. It's not just neoliberal. I think it's more than that. Is there's a way in which not acknowledging death is detrimental to our health, um, in the long run, in the end. So I think that for me, this is, I'm honoring, and it feels like it is in some way a relief. And in fact, I haven't written a lot about this. I mean, I read an article too, but in other years I read it much more academically, because I think that I feel like I want to get to the essential, and of course, that's hard. And I think with this painting, I did get to at least one specifically essential, and that is recognizing that each person in those 6 million that have died, over 6 million that have died, it's not just an individual; it's a story, it's a family, it's a whole world that went. Um,
Let me just, first of all, just sorry about your loss and your
yeah,
mom, and thank you for talking about it. And it's terrible to have it in this context, as you said, when it's hard to, we can't be with people.
yeah.
You know how many guests I've talked to on COVID calls who've shared, either when I asked them or they just offered it, that there was a funeral they were supposed to go to, maybe not even a very close family member, not a parent,
Right.
but that they'd been denied that that ability to do so. And there's still,
Right.
the fact that they mention it on a podcast
Yeah.
like a year later tells me they're still grappling with it. If I'm not a
Yeah.
person
Yeah.
they know well, and this is like a chance 1 hour on a podcast and they want to talk about it, that means there's something really serious out there in the land that people are coping with right now.
Right. 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 And we moved to even funerals that had a digital. I know that my mom was video, so people could watch the video, and it was recorded. I haven't been able to see it. I mean, a year and a half after. And I give the major eulogy, and I'm very proud of having, I think, given her dignity in her death, and that she was in control in some way. But I do think that I see, I wonder how it get multiplied. It's multiplies by millions of people, and those millions of people with other millions of people that are associated, and then there's have to that we need to fight for that recognition. I find it really, and that's the connection with some of what the atrocities that happened to the dictatorship. This is different, but I think that the sentiment is going to stay with us. And in my explain, and this is for another program, some of the violence and trauma that we see these days. This painting is interesting because you see that this many of these, they're different kinds. There's some that are more like, I think, that were left, but this one, you see that lung experience that you're talking about,
Right.
in here. These ones are, they say, I'm a cell, I'm a drop, I'm blood, I'm and that's what that is. And they belong to that moment. I don't. It's one of those things that I think I'm never going to paint something like this again. There's one or two that I think I'll paint, but there's others that are just going to. They're just such an expression of the moment of that quarantine.
And
Trying to make sense. We're all trying to make. I mean, look at this. I mean, this one looks. It could be a cell. It could be, but it could also be space. It could be that systemic. Think of how, but there is that, again, that connecting
yeah,
element.
it's very cellular. And these are the ones, when I was first looking at these, when you shared these with me, I just fell out of my chair when I saw these, because so
Yeah.
they brought together for me, because I'm not a person who can create in the way that you do. They did a lot for me. They helped me see some things, and we
Yeah.
had been really inundated with COVID visualizations.
Right. Right.
but
Right.
not enough COVID visualizations like these that brought a variety of colors and form. This is obviously, I mean, this is a COVID painting. I mean, I just feel that even if
Yeah,
you're directly,
they are. They
yeah.
are. Really, they are. Yeah,
So,
this one though is, this one. You see, compare this one with the previous one. I mean, the previous one is covered painting and is breakages and is chaotic and is explosive and it's all those things. But you see the next one, it has two colors that are pure hope for me: gold and blue.
hmm,
And it's like wow. I mean, this one's, I hope I can paint more of that. I mean, that there is that power of hope, yeah, in this. So there's some of these, not many, but that there's
can you
another one that is like a like
yeah,
a
and I wonder this one too, in terms of technique, the the raised part, which some people might see a mountain ridge from above, I see, as I said earlier, I see the branching of a
yeah,
circulatory system
yeah.
or a breathing system. How do you, if you don't mind me asking, how do you accomplish that effect?
Well, there's several things. Well, first, I'm using spatula. Oh, this one I have to talk about that one. There's spatula, and so there's this sort of like a thing that you do with the spatula that moves the paint in the way that is there. On the one hand, there's also the use of some acrylic material that doesn't have any color that you don't see there,
Hmm.
that allows for that volume on the other hand. And also is the mixing of that with watercolors, that you can hardly see, but it adds a sense of perspective. Like if you see at the top, yeah, those, there's this light blue and stuff. So
Right.
that is not that. So the very dark blue is acrylic, but the light one is watercolor. And in the middle there's a mix. There's is something that allows for, it's like gesso, but it's not gesso, that allows for that sense. So that play allows, generates that effect. Sometimes I did not use brushes in many of these paints, so I use objects. I use a credit card that I cut in certain ways. It's the beauty of it. I mean, it has a lot of playing with it.
Hmm.
One of the things I have to say is that I share with you most of them. I didn't throw any. I mean, they're not. There are very few that I discarded. That's what I'm gonna say. Very few. There's some that I discarded because I felt that they were dirty. They were not. They felt like as if we were just throwing paint in it. But in general, they're all pretty uniquely. I mean, here it comes. Okay, so this one. So there's several. This is using. I'm not using watercolor here. It's just acrylic and also like Crayola, but professional Crayola. And I was practicing using just black and white here,
Hmm.
and it intends to be um, like I'm telling you that there was something here that is not anymore. That's the theme of this.
Hmm.
And at that time when I did these things, we were not talking about long COVID.
Right. Right.
And for me, this is a little bit of the uncertainty and the not knowing of what post COVID is, because there's something that is so like there, but you don't know what it is, and it looks like an X-ray, but it's not an X-ray. It's so this one, like most abstract anyway, it's about making sense, but you don't necessarily, some folks, if you go to MoMA or you go to an art, contemporary art museum, from my perspective, the worst way to approach a museum, if you only have a few hours and not several days, is to try to see too much in 2 or 3 hours, rather than just entering, and if you find something that is interesting, just stay there for a while. And the experience is, and that's the reason there are seats in many places, particularly with large paintings, is because it's like watching a movie. It's, you see it, you see more and more things. And when I'm painting, I also have to do that. I have to see it for a while, not do much intervention, and then decide if how I want to intervene. So this one didn't have much black, but it had more white. And I when I see it, I said, no, this is not clear. So I start to add layers of black, because this is just black and white, and the gray, it's all, I'm not using gray as a color here. In some other paintings I do, and this one is just playing with black and white.
What you're saying about seeing, I mean, there's first of all, if you're in an art museum and if you're in the Rothko room, if there's a Rothko, and
I saw a whole Rothko on the Guggenheim once.
And you watch people come in and they spend 5 seconds with Rothko and then they leave.
Yeah.
And I think, no, but wait, you want to grab them. You'd be like, no, there's a whole thing. If you just watch 60 seconds,
and
I'm going to ask you, what color do you see? And then just watch it for 60, like you described it, like a movie. It's cinematic. And I really appreciate your description of this as a way to think about what's coming next with COVID. That it will, as we were talking earlier, that it's many different pandemics depending on where you are, and it's been moving through time, and people have often marked that out through numbers, as we were talking about earlier. But it needs to be also marked out by emotions and by the accretion of memory and by experiences lost, things that are much harder to quantify. And to me, this painting helps with that.
Yeah. And it's interesting because if you see this painting, you could see it as someone step on the ground, but it also, you could be seen as a sculpture.
That's how I saw it.
It has having a form, and it's almost like a face. It's, and you can see different faces. I mean, if you look on this, you see eyes, and you see a nose, and you see a face front, but also you could see one from the other side. So, and it's an emotional one. If you start seeing sort of like a child somehow, or a monkey, those so and here's where art and understanding the human experience is so important, because in a way, with post-COVID, it's not gonna be, and we're not gonna be able to analyze this from one perspective, and there's not gonna be a definite answer. This one is that one is those three ones. It's also, I love this, and I hope to continue experimenting with this more. These are like fingerprints. This is the other part of the piece, and it's not my finger, by the way. And it, and this is so in the same way. Because these ones are inspired not in fingers, they're inspired in these trees that when they dry, they're like they're like a little thing from a tree, and these ones like some leaves, where I got the inspiration for the color here from the autumn color. But this one is again the stamping of something. For me, it's really became three fingers, and so like you're leaving something there, and that is so fragile. These are very fragile. I mean, if you think about it, they're very fragile pieces. They're not like others that are potent and power. Even some of these ones I showed you earlier that have this tremendous potency. These ones are like fragile.
I'm just going to come to a few more of these, and we've got about 10 minutes left. So stop me at any point, but I wanted to make sure that we get to
So we'll go back here, because one here. So this one, it's, so I'll tell you a story about that color. So there's a national here, this guy's like 85. He's maybe he's 90. He's really someone who's been around. He's an artist, an abstract artist who I have learned a lot from, and I had the privilege of meeting him. I don't know, 7 years ago or something, and I asked, and I visit him and I learn from him, and he has been very supportive of my work. I have begun this as an adult, so I'm sort of like really just learning. But so sometimes, when I used to go back and forth with the States, I say, do you need something? So if particular some pigment or some paint, and for me it was, so he will ask me something, and he asked me for that color. I don't remember the name, particular tonality, and it's a very hard color to paint with. So when he asked me to bring him that color, that piece of acrylic paint, that I had to go to a particular store and all that, which is the part that I like, because I sort of like get instructions from a master.
Sure.
And so now I can go and talk to the owner of the store and ask for it. And said, someone asked you for this. I mean, and then I buy some for me. So I had not used it, and I use it in this paint, and it's a very powerful red. It's sort of like a revolutionary red, if you think about it. And combined with the black, it's very, it's almost exploding. It's not blood in the health sense. It's blood in the revolutionary sense of blood. And maybe one of the reasons this guy, this Guillermo Núñez is his name, paints that way. He's a revolutionary. He lived in exile for a long time. He's just an incredible guy, and maybe that's why he paints with that color. He can do it. I feel like I have respect for the color.
Right.
But somehow, I did a few pieces with the color because for us, and in many countries that's also true, we were not just dealing with the uncertainty of the pandemic. We were dealing with our own sort of like revolutionary moment, transformative moment. And, so there's some of that too. And the pandemic, all it did was to generate, for obvious reasons, limit the possibility of expressing and to do changes, social changes, because you need to be with people, you need to be in the street, you need to whatever life to go on. So that's that painting about. There's a few of those, that have that element. That there it is again, and this one combines with the other things.
Right.
Yeah, it's living a legacy also. A lot of these paintings, as you see, this one is from the series this is the one that you use for COVID calls.
Yeah.
This is the original painting. I think one of the things about these postcards is their inscriptions. They are and some look. I'll show you this one. It's somewhere in there, but this one, if you see it, it has some luminosity in it. It's hard to see. There's a little, and again, before we went officially in the program, we were discussing this, how we were doing, and it's the pandemic is a lesson of uncertainty after uncertainty after uncertainty. When you think you understand what's going on, you realize things are not the way they were supposed to be. It's sort of like, and at the same time, there's always this piece of there's a light somewhere, some luminosity that you could look at. And here again, this violet color, and there's that goal that is telling you, we will survive, we will do something, but it's also dangerous. Yeah, let's see what others you have there.
Yeah. This one, I'll just keep moving, but this now, let me just go back for a second. I mean, this to me, I can't think about COVID calls without seeing this image.
Yeah,
And in fact, it's become the color palette and the sort of, it's given a look to something which is fundamentally about words, about conversation.
Yeah.
In passing. And, I mean, I should have said this from the top, but just thank you for making this work. And thank you for making this one. Because it has come back to me so many different times throughout all this that we just don't have enough tools to make sense of enormity, of loss, of grief. And that's why I've really loved talking with musicians and artists of all different kinds, and historians who are trying to get outside of the confines that we have professionalized ourselves into. And it's writing.
But it's not. But also at the same time, Scott, it's not just loss and grief or ambiguous loss, as Pauline Boss talks about it. She's published a book about this.
Yeah.
But in this one, maybe we were not conscious when we decided on this one. Again, that goal is sort of like coming out of it.
Yeah, there's some hope there. That's right.
And then there's the hope. And I think, I mean, you have your program that is a lot about that, creating a network of people. It's the same thing that happened to me. I mean, I met for the first time after 2 years, one of the two networks that I have participated. It's called COVID-19 Chile. Where there are people from all over the country, some very far. But we had lunch last week at a restaurant for the first time. So we met in person. It was like, and time just flew. We didn't talk about the numbers or this or that. And we just talk, chat, and it was amazing. I mean, and I have to say, for some of us, we had the opportunity to create networks to withstand this thing, and I think that's a lesson again, that collaboration and keeping yourself grounded in what matters, it's still a good recipe in perilous times as this one's.
So people should check out the full quarantine series on the COVID Calls website, covid-calls.com or covidcalls.net. And are you selling these?
Yes, yes, I am selling this some, and I actually am bringing some to the US next week.
How should people reach you if they go through
they
the
can
series?
Email me, which is my last name @gmail.com.
Okay.
Or they can contact me via Twitter, which is another way of connecting. It's easy to find me. Okay. And they can go to my website and email me through this email that is easier to find, which is bacigalupe@gmail. The website has some of the art. It has not been updated. I haven't had time to update everything. The next stage of this thing. Oh, the other thing, the other stage, we published a book, which we didn't talk about, and we talked another time, where Latinx artists in the greater Boston area. Last year, we did a call for art, and we published a book. Let me show you the book, which is called Memories of COVID-19, the Latinx Greater Boston Art Project. And it has a couple of my paintings. In fact, the back is the one that we're discussing. And then we have another one that we didn't discuss today, that is later, and it was in an exhibit with the Brick Bottom Artist Collaborative in Somerville, which is part of the quarantine series, but it's a larger painting, and it's called Virus. And one of the things about this, again, it developed a network of folks who were isolated, who did amazing, pieces of work. I mean, related to, the cover. When we received this painting, we knew that this was going to be the cover, and they were all sort of, people send videos, they send poems, and we put them in the book. And here you like this because you talk about the lungs.
No, that's amazing.
Yeah, and so it's I guess some of us have that thing when something happens, we have to do something, and we try.
That's one way to put it. I think you've done more than something. You've done a lot. I mean,
I wish I could do more, but
yeah, but the sharing of these works, and now I'm we've had this conversation, and now I'm going to take this conversation and turn it into a Q&A, which will live on our site, and that we can then attach some of that description in detail, including the meaning and the technique and what you were doing, grappling with as you made the pieces. That will all be, that's another layer.
Yeah, it's I have to also say, I mean, for those of you who are listening, and probably a lot of the folks who are listening have tremendous achievements in different areas, and many people, and including myself, had the idea of painting for a long time. I thought about painting, and I never did it. Because the message you get as a kid, that's not something that you can do. You're not gonna live with that, or that's not good, whatever. And I had to have an accident, very bad one, breaking my shoulder and stuff, to start painting, because I had some time and the energy, whatever, and I needed to do something with it. But what I'm trying to say is, it's painting is something that you can just start doing, and and the only thing you need to do is, other artists are always interested in talking about their art, and they're very giving, and people like to talk about materiality. I mean, and I think that the older you are, you have more to express, and not always writing is it could be music, it could be dance, it could be all kinds of things, but that these expressive pieces just start to emerge, because it's there for you to express it, and it's quite, it opens up a whole world, I guess, which I think it's important for those of us who basically have been trained in the more cognitive, linear way of presenting ourselves when we teach or do research or whatever.
Well, let me just thank you for taking time with these, and remind folks you've been listening to COVID Calls, episode number 501, and encourage everybody to go to the website, the digital archive for COVID Calls, and check out this work, and then all of the other things that are there, and we'll keep building the website as we go. Gonzalo, hang out for just a minute after I close the call, and we can
thank you, Scott,
individually. And thank you, and stay healthy, everybody, and we'll see you next time on COVID Calls.